Hey y'all, welcome back to Ernest Cole Fishing. I am, as always, the Bass Man Ernest Cole, and today's video I'm going to show you guys two finesse techniques to use when fishing is really tough, especially in the summertime. One you might have thought of and one you might not have thought of, so stick around. All right, y'all, the first technique that I'm going to go over to in this video, I'm going to show you guys how to fish it, how to work it, how to catch fish on it, and that is the old tried and true wacky rig. Now, some of you guys may use this, some of you guys may not, but for those of you who have not used it, this video will be helpful to you, hopefully. Now, what I've got this rigged on, let's take this hook off, take the bait off. This is about a #1 size. This is a weedless wacky rig hook. I think it's a Trocar. I've had these for a long time and I don't remember the brand, but I think it's a Trocar. I'll look it up, and if whichever brand it is, I will leave a link in the description so you guys can come and get that yourself. A lot of people don't use a weed guard with this. That's fine. I like to use the ones with the weed guard just because sometimes I fish this around grass and around trees and rocks, and I don't really want to get it hung up because essentially you have an exposed hook here. Now, this is the bait that I use a lot on this. This is a yum dinger. Now, how you rig this, there's one of two ways. You guys can use a wacky rig tool. It's got an O-ring that slips over the top of this. You stick it in there, it's like a pin, and do that. I do that sometimes, but by and large, I use just a straight, I will hook it right in the middle or there along there. Usually these worms that I use have an egg sac. I'll hook it in an egg sac, and it's, I try to get it in the middle if I can, or maybe just a little bit off-centered, because when you're fishing this is a very, very subtle technique, and I'll get into how you fish that in just a second. But basically, what you're doing is you hook that in the middle, and basically that bait is going to flutter down because it's in the middle. There's, the weight. This hook is going to pull it down a little bit, and it'll flutter down, and that's what really attracts those fish. This one's got kind of a crooked tail because I had it in my box here, kind of bent up, but usually these are straight. But that's just a real subtle technique, and on hot days, especially in the summertime, this is a great technique to use that, when the fish just aren't biting, you can't get them to bite on like a spinnerbait, top water, flipping, you put this in there, and it basically, it just kind of hangs there a little bit. A lot of people use Senkos, you can use yum dingers. Basically, you want a worm that falls, or excuse me, you want a worm that sinks. Now, these are loaded with salt. Senkos are loaded with salt. A lot of people would Texas rig these and just fish these kind of like a floating worm style. These style are great because, the salt in there, it will kind of help that fall down. And that's a good technique. It's a good subtle technique to use when the fishing is tough. Now, I'm going to jump up here on the front deck and get us set up on a spot, and I'm going to show you guys exactly how to use this technique, and most of all, I'm going to show you guys how to catch a fish with it. All right, fishing a wacky rig is probably one of the easiest ways if you're learning how to fish, especially. Now, it's pretty simple. You got the rig, which I've showed you guys how to rig this up. You find your, whatever you're casting to, whether it be a dock, a stick, or tree, or some grass, whatever. And basically, you cast out, and you just don't do a lot of anything. You just kind of let the bait fall. When you get a bite, which I just had, it's going to be just that classic thump, but with the way these circle hooks type, it's kind of like a circle hook. You basically just want to reel that slack up, and just ease into the fish. It's not a reel down and jerk the hook set. It's just cast out and just kind of let it sit there for a little bit, and that'll kind of flutter down as it's falling, and that little subtle flutter is what drives the fish crazy. Let it flutter, and you can do a little little pop pop with your rod tip, and that'll kind of make that jump up a little bit. Also to kind of get that fish's attention as well. I just had another bite there. But a wacky rig is an excellent way, especially in the summertime. It's good 24/7. But in the summertime, when it's hot, when things are just slow, fishing slow, a real subtle wacky rig presentation will usually yield you a couple of extra bites during the course of the day. And I love fishing a wacky rig on those hot summer days when you're just out here, it's just miserably hot, can't get a bite to save your life, but you just throw that wacky rig out there and you basically just sit and wait for a minute, a few seconds, give it a little tap tap, wait and let that flutter down a little bit, and it's kind of gliding a little bit as it's falling. So it's not just falling straight down, it'll kind of glide one way or the other. And this is a weightless wacky rig. Sometimes I'll use a weighted hook, which has got like a 1/16 ounce if I'm fishing really deep. But most of the time I'm not. But I just cast it out there and just let it sit. Just kind of give it a little bump bump and let it sit. There's a bite. All right, just lean into it. There we go. All right. See how I didn't just jerk the rod, I just kind of reeled up that slack and just leaned into it. That's a decent fish there. Get up here, Joker. All right, guys. Well, he stole my little Cinco, but there's a decent fish there. It's a keeper. But a wacky rig on those hot summer days when the bite is tough, and I do the same thing in the winter time when it's real cold. Bite is really super tough. Anytime that the bite is really tough on you guys, and y'all need just you just need to catch a fish. You've been 2 hours without a bite. Tie you guys on a wacky rig, toss it out there, just give it a little bump bump, a little shaky shake, and it'll yield you hopefully a nice fish. And I've caught some really big fish on small, like 4-inch yum dingers and Cincos. Caught some really nice fish on that when the fish just, they're real finicky after a cold front. Anytime that you need a subtle presentation, a wacky rig is a good thing to use. There you go. All right, y'all, that is how you fish a wacky rig. Now, let's get into the second technique, and I'll show you guys how to fish that as well. Hey guys, before we get into the second technique, do me a favor if you've not already, and hit that subscribe button and smash that bell notification, and drop a comment below and tell me, do you guys use a wacky rig, and what are your preferred baits on it? All right guys, the second technique that I'm going to teach you guys how to use today is called the Mojo Rig. Now you say, what is a Mojo Rig? It is basically, in its simplest explanation, is a lightweight Carolina rig. Now how I use this is I've got these, this is a lure body, for lack of a better term. What I did is I took like an inline spinner or a rooster tail, and I cut the weight out of that and just used the weight. This is kind of about an 1/8 ounce weight. You can get a mold from Do It to make your own weights, and a lot of guys up north make their own inline spinners. We call them rooster tails around here. But it's basically a long cylindrical weight. I've got it pegged on both ends with bobber stops. That does two things for me. First off, it keeps it where I want it to be. And second off, it's just a little bit of that egg-shaped bobber stop if I'm fishing around grass or maybe even some riprap or rock That's going to help it come through there just a little bit better. It's going to protect my line if you get, you know, bang this weight up and get kind of mashed up or any kind of nicks on it. It's also going to help protect your line. Now on the other end, I will tie some type, and this is key, you want to fish this with some type of floating worm. Now the reason for that is because this little weight here, it's bebopping on the bottom here, bouncing around, even through the grass, it'll snake its way in there. But your weight, or your lure back here, it's up above it. It's going to float up above it, kind of shimmy and quiver and do what floating worms do. And that's what attracts the fish. It's not this, it's this. Floating above, not on the bottom, just kind of hovering above the bottom, going along floating, and that's what triggers the strikes. Now, the key to that is the floating worm. You can use a lot of them. Trick worms float. This is a one I've been using today. It's a Z-Bait Co. ribtail worm. But any type of floating worm will do, and that is the key to getting this technique to work. Now, length-wise, I'll vary it. You know, that's one of those things. It's kind of like a Carolina rig. You just kind of got to feel the fish out and see what kind of mood they're in. But the good thing about this, as opposed to a Carolina rig, is you can move this as close or as far away from this bait as you think that you need to, and find the length that's going to trigger that bite for you. I like to keep mine around 12 inches to start with, and you know, if I'm not getting a lot of bites, I will kind of vary this up. The problem with this is, you know, being a subtle technique, and this kind of floating, and sometimes, you know, when you stop it, it'll kind of float towards the weight a little bit. It can be hard to detect a bite. That is the only drawback, and you do have a tendency, if you're not really paying attention to your line, to watch your line jump, or maybe have that finger on the line, or have kind of a semi-slack to semi-taut line. You will have a tendency to gut hook your fish. There's a lot of videos out there to show you how to save a fish if you do gut hook them. I know how to do it, and if I can think of it one of these days, I'll make a video on it. But that's the only drawback that I see. But this triggers a lot of fish. I have caught a lot of fish and a lot of big fish using this technique. The only problem is it's a very subtle bite. A lot of times all you'll feel is just that weight on there. When you're reeling in, you think you hadn't got a bite, you'll reel it in and the fish will just actually be there, and that's how you gut hook them. The fish will actually swallow the bait. But you know, if you're careful with them, you can always get that out. All right, now that I've showed you guys how to rig this up, let's jump up on the front of the deck here, and I'm going to show you guys how to fish this. All right, y'all, let's get into how to fish the Mojo Rig. The way I throw this out, because those bobber stops, they hold really good, but you know, they're not like a swivel on there. I'll throw it out, but I won't just really hammer it out there. If you do, those, you know, the bobber stops are great, but they will slide down to your worm, and it kind of defeats the purpose of this rig. But the thing about this is the same with a Carolina rig. Once you feel that tap, it's going to be subtle a lot of times with this rig, and you really want to be mindful of your line and if you feel any bite at all, because with this rig, the only downfall that I don't like about this rig is you do have a tendency to gut hook those fish, because they get a chance to hang on to it for so long, they'll actually try to swallow it a little bit. And you know, you do have a tendency to gut hook it. I try not to. It does happen sometimes with this rig. I would say that would be the only drawback with this rig. But it's kind of the same as a Carolina rig. It's kind of a cross between a Carolina rig and a trick worm technique, or a floating worm. You're just kind of dragging it along the bottom. You can give it a few hops. Once you feel it hit that bottom, give it a few seconds. Reel up your slack. You know, just kind of drag it a little bit. I mean, this is a subtle presentation. You're not just out there it's not a jerk bait, it's not a crank bait. You know, it's not even really a Texas rig. It is a very slow, very subtle technique that works really good in the summertime. I've caught some really, really good bass. Actually, You know, you guys know I don't fish tournaments, but the last tournament that I did fish, I was using this technique and I caught the biggest bag of fish I'd ever caught ever. It was like 15 pounds. I know that's not a big bag to some folks, but it is to me if you don't fish tournaments. But it's a very subtle technique. It's one you really got to be mindful with, but it will catch you some big fish, especially on slow days when, you know, like summertime. We're in that summertime grind right now. And fishing, you know, after about, you know, 7, 8 o'clock, it really gets tough. So that's a good time to switch to this technique. And it can yield you some great results. Oh, there it is. See, that's the problem. I had that fish the whole time, and I just reeled up my slack, and he was on there. Never felt a bite, never felt a tap, nothing. And I hope that I do not have this fish gut hooked. Nope, I don't. He's good. All right. Like I said, with this bite, guys, you know, it is so subtle. I never felt the fish. I felt kind of a tap up there, but just kept reeling it in and never felt the weight of my lure. I never felt the weight of my worm. But, you know, hey, good little spotted bass there. He got little marks on him. But yeah, never felt the bite, never felt that little tap. I just reeled up my slack. And that's what a lot of times what you'll do with this technique is you'll just reel it up and you'll just feel that fish on there. That's how you gut hook them. Hopefully I didn't do it in this instance. No, I think he's gonna be all right. Not bleeding or anything, so let's get this hook out. He got her buried deep, but he's gonna be all right. But yeah, just this technique is a very, very subtle bite. You really gotta be a good line watcher. You really gotta really stay, you know, you want kind of a semi-slack line to let that lure kind of work. But at the same time, you know, you really want to be mindful of your line with this technique. But that's a little fat one there. Let's get the hook out. I'm gonna need my pliers for that, and let's catch some more. All right, y'all, that is 2 techniques that I use regularly when the bite is tough, especially on these hot days of summer, when the fish just don't want to get out and chase, don't want to react. Those are 2 real subtle techniques that will get you a few more bites within the course of a day. You know, everybody likes to throw top water in the summertime and just, you know, watch that big explosion. I do. I fished top water this morning before you know, the bite kind of died, and I switched over to my finesse techniques. But in the summertime, if you guys will use these 2 techniques, I guarantee you it'll put a few more fish in the boat for you. You know, especially, you know, a lot of tournament guys, you know, that's a lot of them use a wacky rig a lot, just to, you know, if you need 5 good bites, you just throw on that wacky rig, and it really does make a difference. But you know, with that being said, guys, drop a comment below and let me know, have you ever used a Mojo rig or a wacky rig, and what are your guys' favorite baits to use on each one of these? With that being said, guys, thank you again for showing up here today and, you know, just kind of listening to me ramble for a few minutes. I hope you guys have been entertained, but most of all, I hope you guys have learned something, and I hope you guys can use these techniques and help you guys put more fish in the boat. You know, I'm going to get out of here and leave you guys with a drone shot. You know I love my drone shots, but, you know, as always, guys, I'm the Bass Man, Ernest, and we'll see you guys down the road. Oh, wait, here's my drone.